The people who humiliate others in public rarely expect the room to remember their own silence. The chandelier light shimmered across crystal glasses and polished silver as conversations drifted through Whitmore House Steak and Lounge like soft waves of money and power. Outside, Manhattan glowed beneath a cold spring rain, yellow taxi lights reflecting against wet pavement while guests in designer coats stepped through the towering glass entrance. Inside, every table was full, every reservation mattered, and every employee knew exactly who sat at table 12 tonight. Damian Whitmore had arrived 37 minutes earlier without an entourage, without security, without the usual noise that followed billionaires everywhere they went. He sat alone near the center of the restaurant beneath the amber pendant lights, his charcoal suit perfectly fitted, his silver watch catching the glow each time he lifted his bourbon glass. Some customers whispered his name when he walked in. Others pretended not to stare. Damian ignored all of them. He had the kind of presence that didn't require attention because silence followed him naturally. Evelyn Carter noticed him the moment he entered, but unlike the others, she didn't pause. She simply grabbed another tray from the kitchen window and continued working. "Corner," she said softly while passing another server. Her voice remained calm even during the dinner rush. That was one thing people remembered about Evelyn. Calm. Always calm. At 27, she moved through the crowded restaurant with quiet precision, balancing heavy plates effortlessly while remembering every customer's order without writing anything down. She greeted regulars by name. She spoke French to the elderly chef whenever he became overwhelmed. And twice a week, she used sign language to communicate with an older deaf customer who always ordered cherry pie and black coffee. Most people barely noticed those things. They only saw the uniform: white shirt, black apron, cheap black shoes with worn soles. Another waitress carrying drinks through rooms full of people who never looked twice at workers unless something went wrong. "Evelyn," the manager whispered sharply near the service station. "Table 7 wants sparkling water, not still." "Already bringing it," she replied. No frustration, no attitude, just steady composure. She picked up the chilled bottle and turned toward the dining room as thunder rolled faintly beyond the windows. Somewhere near the bar, a woman laughed too loudly. At another table, investment bankers argued over a merger worth more money than Evelyn would probably see in 3 lifetimes. None of it mattered to her anymore. She had learned years ago that rich people often spoke the loudest when they were the emptiest. "Excuse me." A sharp female voice suddenly cut through the room. Evelyn turned immediately. Table 9. A blonde woman draped in diamonds held up her wine glass with visible disgust. "This isn't the Pinot Noir I ordered." Evelyn approached with her usual professional expression. "I'm sorry about that, ma'am. Let me replace it for you right away." Obviously, the woman snapped. The man beside her shifted uncomfortably while nearby tables pretended not to listen. Evelyn reached carefully for the glass, but before she could lift it, the woman suddenly flicked her wrist. Red wine splashed across the edge of the tablecloth and onto Evelyn's sleeve. A few drops landed on the floor between them. Silence spread instantly. "Oh my God," the woman said loudly, though her expression carried no real embarrassment. "You people really can't do anything right." Several heads turned. Forks paused midair. The pianist near the lounge slowed for half a second before continuing again. Evelyn looked down at the wine staining her white cuff. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray in her hand. "Only slightly. I apologize for the inconvenience," she said calmly. "I'll clean this immediately." "Maybe you should learn how to serve before working somewhere this expensive," the woman continued, her voice rising just enough for nearby tables to hear clearly. Honestly, restaurants lower their standards every year. A few uncomfortable chuckles echoed nearby. Someone looked away. Someone else smirked into their cocktail glass. And nobody said a word. Evelyn knelt quietly beside the table and reached for a cloth from her apron pocket. Her movements remained graceful despite the heat crawling slowly into her face. Years ago, comments like this would have shattered her confidence. Years ago, she might have cried in the bathroom afterward. But life had a way of teaching endurance to people who survived disappointment long enough. "You should be grateful people like us even tip you," the woman added coldly. The sentence hung in the air like smoke. Near the center of the room, Damian Whitmore finally looked up from his drink. Slowly, deliberately, his gray eyes settled first on the woman. then on Evelyn kneeling silently beside the table while red wine stained her sleeve beneath the golden lights. Something unreadable crossed his face. The restaurant manager hurried over immediately, panic already forming behind his forced smile. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize." "No," the woman interrupted sharply. "I want her removed from our section. Immediately." Evelyn stood slowly before the manager could speak. "It's all right," she said quietly. "I can take another section." Her voice never cracked. That almost made it worse. The manager exhaled with relief, clearly ready to move on before the situation damaged the restaurant's reputation. But then a chair scraped softly against the hardwood floor. The sound wasn't loud. Still, every conversation in the restaurant stopped. Damian Whitmore rose to his feet. 6'3", calm, impossibly composed beneath the warm chandelier glow. He adjusted the sleeve of his jacket once before looking directly at the woman who had humiliated Evelyn moments earlier. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because men like Damian Whitmore didn't stand up for waitresses. And yet somehow, the entire room suddenly felt like it was waiting for him to speak. Damian Whitmore did not raise his voice. Somehow, that made the silence heavier. His glass remained untouched on the table behind him as he looked at the woman in diamonds with an expression so calm it became impossible to read. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows overlooking Lexington Avenue, while the entire restaurant seemed frozen beneath the amber light. "Did she insult you?" Damian asked Evelyn quietly. The question caught everyone off guard. Evelyn blinked once, still holding the folded cloth in her hand. "No, sir," she answered carefully. "Then did she refuse to help you after the accident?" Damian continued. The blonde woman crossed her arms immediately. "Excuse me." He ignored her completely. His attention remained on Evelyn. "Did she?" Evelyn hesitated. "No." Damian nodded once. "Interesting." The manager shifted nervously beside table 9, sweat visible near his collar despite the cold air conditioning. Nobody liked uncertainty around powerful people. And Damian Whitmore had built an empire around making rooms uncomfortable without ever appearing emotional. "Mr. Whitmore," the woman said sharply, finally recognizing him fully now. "With all due respect, this employee ruined our evening." Damian slowly turned toward her. "Your evening survived spilled wine," he said evenly. "Her dignity may not survive public humiliation." The sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. No one moved. Somewhere near the bar, a glass clinked softly against another before silence returned again. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly. Not out of shame, out of surprise. In 5 years of restaurant work, no customer had ever defended her publicly before. Not once. The woman laughed awkwardly, clearly expecting support from the surrounding tables. "Come on. This is ridiculous. She works here. It is literally her job to handle criticism." Damian slipped one hand into his pocket. "Criticism," he repeated softly. "Not cruelty." The man sitting beside the woman suddenly focused very hard on his steak knife, as if studying the metal could somehow remove him from the moment. Around the restaurant, people avoided eye contact. That was the strange thing about public humiliation. Everyone noticed it. Almost nobody interrupted it. Damian glanced toward the wine stain still visible along Evelyn's sleeve. "You apologized immediately," he said to her. "Yes, sir. And yet you were still standing here being spoken to like you were less important than everyone else in this room." Evelyn swallowed quietly. "It is all right." Damian studied her face for a long second. Calm eyes. Tired eyes. The kind of eyes people developed after disappointment stopped surprising them. Then, without warning, he reached toward the empty chair beside his own table. "Sit down for a moment." Half the restaurant visibly stiffened. The manager nearly choked. "Sir, I do not think that is appropriate during service hours. I was not speaking to you," Damian replied calmly. The manager went silent instantly. Evelyn remained still. "I should get back to work." "You should," Damian agreed. "But first, you should stop standing here while strangers discuss whether you deserve basic respect." The room became so quiet the rain outside sounded louder now. Evelyn looked uncertain for the first time all evening. Not weak. Just caught off guard by kindness she clearly did not expect. Slowly, she placed the cloth onto the edge of the table. Then she sat down carefully in the empty chair beside Damian Whitmore, while every wealthy guest in the restaurant watched in disbelief. The blonde woman's face turned bright red. This is absurd. Damien finally looked directly at her again. No, he said quietly. What was absurd was watching a room full of educated adults stay silent, while someone earning an hourly wage was treated like she had no value. Nobody defended the woman now. Nobody even tried. Because deep down, every person in that restaurant knew exactly what they had done, or failed to do. Evelyn sat with perfect posture, hands folded lightly in her lap. Up close, Damien noticed details others probably missed. The faint ink mark near her wrist, the tiny scar beside her thumb, the exhaustion hidden beneath careful professionalism. How long have you worked here? He asked. Almost 4 years. And before that? Evelyn hesitated slightly. Other restaurants. Damien almost smiled. Deflection. Clean and practiced. You speak French, he said. Enough to survive Chef Lawrence's bad moods. A few nearby tables laughed softly under their breath, tension finally beginning to crack. Even Damien's expression shifted slightly. That explains why he has not fired half this staff yet. Evelyn looked at him fully then, surprised again. Because billionaires were not supposed to notice kitchen dynamics. They were not supposed to remember small things. Damien noticed the surprise immediately. I pay attention, he said simply. Most powerful people only pay attention upward. Evelyn replied before she could stop herself. The words slipped out softly, almost accidentally. The manager looked horrified. But Damien leaned back slowly in his chair, studying her with something closer to curiosity now. And what do you think I do? Evelyn glanced around the restaurant. Crystal glasses. Expensive watches. Men discussing acquisitions over $25 bourbon pours. I think, she said carefully, people get very used to being treated important when they have money. Damien nodded once. True. And after a while, Evelyn continued quietly, they stopped noticing people who serve them. For the first time all evening, Damien Whitmore looked genuinely uncomfortable. Not angry. Honest discomfort. The kind caused by truth instead of insult. Rain rolled harder against the windows now, streaking silver across the Manhattan skyline. Near the entrance, another wealthy couple stepped inside laughing beneath a shared umbrella, completely unaware the atmosphere in the restaurant had changed entirely. Damien looked down briefly at the untouched bourbon beside him before speaking again. My mother worked in a diner for 18 years, he said quietly. Evelyn blinked. Really? Double shifts most nights. His voice remained calm, but something softer appeared underneath it now. People spoke to her exactly the way you were spoken to tonight. The restaurant remained silent, listening. And the worst part, Damien added, was never the rude customers. He looked slowly around the room. It was how many decent people stayed silent while it happened. No one at table 9 spoke again after that. The energy inside Whitmore House Steak and Lounge changed after that. Conversations returned eventually, but softer now. Controlled. Like people suddenly remembered they were being watched by their own conscience. Evelyn rose carefully from the chair beside Damien Whitmore, smoothing the sleeve still stained with wine. Thank you, she said quietly. Damien gave a small nod. You do not owe me gratitude for basic decency. The words lingered with her longer than she expected. Across the dining room, the blonde woman avoided eye contact completely now, her attention locked onto her untouched dinner while her husband stared into his whiskey glass with visible discomfort. The manager cleared his throat nervously. Evelyn, perhaps you should take a short break. She almost said no automatically. Bills did not care about humiliation. Rent did not pause because someone embarrassed you publicly. But Damien spoke first. Take 15 minutes. His tone was calm, not controlling, simply certain. Evelyn hesitated, then gave a small nod and quietly disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors while dozens of eyes followed her. The moment she entered the back hallway, the noise from the dining room faded into a dull murmur. Stainless steel counters gleamed beneath fluorescent lights while cooks moved around steaming pans and sizzling grills with practiced urgency. Chef Laurent barked something in French near the stove before stopping when he saw Evelyn's face. His expression softened immediately. Who did this? He asked quietly in heavily accented English. Evelyn forced a small smile. It is handled. The older chef studied her stained sleeve and sighed deeply through his nose. People with too much money forget they are still human. Some remember. Evelyn replied softly before reaching for a fresh apron from the storage shelf. Laurent paused while chopping parsley. The billionaire? She nodded once. Interesting man. Evelyn changed quickly in the employee restroom, washing the wine stain from her wrist beneath cold water while staring at her reflection in the mirror. She looked composed, but exhaustion lived quietly beneath her eyes tonight. Not because of the rude customer. She had survived worse than rude customers. What unsettled her was Damian Whitmore himself. The way he noticed things. The way he spoke without trying to impress anyone. Powerful men usually performed kindness loudly when cameras existed nearby. Damian had looked almost irritated by the entire situation, like cruelty offended him personally. That part confused her. "You okay?" Another waitress asked gently from the doorway. Melanie, 22 years old, single mother, constantly worried about daycare expenses. Evelyn nodded automatically. "I am fine." Melanie leaned against the wall. "That was insane out there. I have had worse." "Maybe. But nobody ever stands up to customers like that." Evelyn dried her hands slowly. "He did not stand up for me." Melanie frowned. "What?" Evelyn looked down briefly. "He stood up against humiliation. There is a difference." Back in the dining room, Damian remained seated alone at table 12 while rain streamed steadily down the windows behind him. His bourbon glass still sat nearly untouched. Several guests glanced toward him occasionally before looking away again. Powerful people made others nervous even in silence. But tonight, something else surrounded him. Reflection. He had not expected the memory of his mother to return so sharply. He could still picture her carrying coffee plates through a roadside diner outside Philadelphia when he was 9 years old. Tired feet. Forced smiles. Customers snapping fingers at her like she was invisible. One night a businessman spilled coffee on purpose because she forgot extra cream. Damian remembered watching her apologize anyway. Watching everyone else keep eating while his mother cleaned the floor alone. He had never forgotten the feeling of helplessness that settled into his chest afterward. Maybe that was why he hated arrogance now. Because he recognized it too easily. "Mr. Whitmore." Damian looked up. The manager stood beside the table again, visibly uneasy. "I wanted to personally apologize for tonight." Damian studied him calmly. "Why?" The man blinked. "Sir, you were not the one insulting her." "No, but I should have handled it faster." Damian leaned back slightly. "You should have handled it before I stood up." The manager swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Damian's gaze shifted toward the kitchen doors. People reveal their character most clearly when someone powerless is embarrassed publicly. The manager looked down immediately because both men knew exactly what Damian meant. Near the piano lounge, an elderly customer suddenly waved gently toward the hostess stand. A silver-haired woman wearing a navy coat had just entered the restaurant carrying a folded umbrella and a small leather purse. The hostess smiled warmly. "Good evening, Mrs. Adler." Evelyn emerged from the hallway at the exact same moment and instantly noticed the older woman. Her expression softened immediately. "Mrs. Adler," she said warmly while approaching. The elderly woman smiled the moment she saw Evelyn. Then her hands moved gracefully through the air in sign language. "Good evening. You look tired tonight." Evelyn laughed quietly before signing back effortlessly. "Long evening. But I am all right now." Damian watched the exchange carefully from across the room. The conversation continued silently between the two women while nearby guests stared with growing curiosity. Mrs. Adler signed quickly again, her face animated beneath the warm light. Evelyn responded just as smoothly, smiling genuinely now for the first time all evening. There was nothing performative about it. No attempt to impress anyone. Just kindness expressed naturally. Damian felt something unexpected settle inside his chest then. Respect. Not the polished admiration people performed in boardrooms. Real respect. Quiet and heavy. He watched Evelyn guide Mrs. Adler carefully toward her usual booth near the windows before signing something that made the older woman laugh softly. Damian noticed details others probably missed again. The way Evelyn slowed her pace so Mrs. Adler could follow comfortably. The patience in her eyes. The complete absence of self-pity despite what happened earlier. Most people became harder after humiliation. Evelyn somehow became gentler. Damian looked down at the silver watch around his wrist for a moment before lifting his eyes toward her again. And for the first time in years, a billionaire who understood markets, negotiations, and human weakness better than almost anyone suddenly realized he could not quite figure out the quiet waitress standing across the room. By 9:40 that evening, the rain outside Manhattan had become heavier, turning the streets below into rivers of blurred yellow lights and reflections. Inside Whitmore House Steak and Lounge, the tension from earlier had softened into something quieter, more thoughtful. Customers still spoke in low conversations over expensive wine and candlelight, but the atmosphere no longer carried the careless arrogance it had before Damien Whitmore stood up from his table. People became more careful after witnessing dignity defended publicly. Evelyn moved through the restaurant again with her usual calm rhythm, carrying plates from the kitchen while softly thanking customers and refilling glasses before anyone asked. But tonight, something felt different. Not because people suddenly respected her more, because they were finally noticing her at all. "Thank you, Evelyn." Mrs. Adler signed warmly before leaving her booth near the window. Evelyn smiled gently and signed back. "Get home safely. The storm is getting worse." The older woman touched Evelyn's hand affectionately before exiting slowly beneath the hostess's umbrella. Damien watched the exchange again from across the dining room. The patience in Evelyn's movements reminded him painfully of someone he had not thought about in years. His mother used to move exactly the same way when she worked late shifts. Tired feet, gentle voice, quiet grace under pressure. He looked down at his untouched bourbon again. Strange how money could buy almost anything except peace with old memories. "You have been staring at that glass for 20 minutes. Damien looked up immediately. Evelyn stood beside the table holding a coffee pot, now instead of a tray. Her expression remained professional, but softer than before. "Have I?" he asked. "Either the bourbon is terrible or your thoughts are expensive tonight." The corner of Damien's mouth almost moved. "Almost." "Coffee," she offered. "Black." Evelyn poured carefully into the porcelain cup sitting near his hand. Steam curled upward between them beneath the amber light. "You do not seem like someone who drinks coffee this late," she said quietly. "You do not seem like someone who judges billionaires correctly," Damien replied. Evelyn glanced at him briefly. "I did not say billionaire. I said someone." For the first time that evening, Damien gave a real smile. Small, brief, but real enough that the bartender nearly dropped a glass while noticing it from across the room. Men like Damien Whitmore rarely smiled in public. "You always speak like that?" he asked. "Like what?" "Like every sentence means two things." Evelyn set the coffee pot down carefully. "Maybe people hear two meanings when they are not used to honesty." Damien leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her again with growing curiosity. "Where did you learn sign language?" "Community college originally." "Originally?" She looked toward the rain outside. "My younger brother lost most of his hearing when he was 10. Damien's expression shifted immediately. "I am sorry." Evelyn gave a faint shrug. "Life happens." "Does he still live in New York?" A small pause. "No." Something in the silence afterward told Damien not to push further. The answer carried weight. "Loss maybe. Or distance." Either way, Evelyn's eyes dimmed for only a second before the professional calm returned again. "You avoid personal questions very smoothly," Damien observed. "Occupational habit." "Waitressing." Evelyn shook her head lightly. "Surviving." The word lingered between them. "Honest." "Quiet." "Heavy." Nearby, the piano player transitioned into a slow jazz standard while rain continued sliding down the tall windows overlooking Lexington Avenue. At another table, two finance executives lowered their voices while glancing occasionally toward Damien and Evelyn with open curiosity now. Rumors spread quickly in wealthy places, especially when powerful men treated ordinary people differently. "You made your manager nervous tonight," Evelyn said after a moment. Damien lifted the coffee cup calmly. "Good. You enjoy intimidating people?" "No," he took a slow sip before setting the cup down again. "I dislike cowardice." Evelyn crossed her arms loosely. "That is a dangerous thing to dislike in Manhattan." Damien looked around the restaurant. Cowardice built half the city. That earned another quiet smile from her before she caught herself. Damien noticed immediately. She rarely relaxed fully around anyone. Even now, part of her remained guarded beneath the calm exterior, like someone who learned long ago that safety never lasted very long. "Why this restaurant?" he asked suddenly. "What do you mean?" "You are clearly intelligent, patient, educated." His gray eyes narrowed slightly. "People do not accidentally become someone like you." Evelyn looked down briefly at the silverware rolled neatly on the empty table beside them. "And what exactly is someone like me?" Damien answered without hesitation. "Someone who notices everything but says very little." The silence after that felt strangely intimate despite the crowded restaurant around them. Not romantic. Human. Two people carrying histories they did not discuss openly. You talk differently than most wealthy men, Evelyn said quietly. Damien almost laughed softly at that. Most wealthy men think silence means weakness. And you? He glanced toward the rain beyond the windows. I think silence usually means someone has learned things the hard way. Evelyn studied him carefully then. For the first time all evening, she looked at Damien Whitmore not as a billionaire customer, but simply as a man sitting alone in an expensive restaurant while the city stormed outside. There was exhaustion in him too, hidden better than most people could hide it. But there, you should probably eat something, she said gently after a moment. Your steak has been cold for at least 30 minutes. Damien looked down at the untouched plate in front of him. I lost my appetite. That expensive? She asked softly. Another brief smile appeared. Possibly. Before Evelyn could answer, the front entrance suddenly opened again with a burst of cold rain air sweeping through the restaurant. A sharply dressed man in his 40s hurried inside, carrying a soaked umbrella and a leather briefcase. The hostess immediately straightened when she recognized him. Damien's expression changed instantly the moment he saw the man. Harder now. Colder. Mr. Whitmore, the newcomer said while approaching quickly. I have been calling you for over an hour. Evelyn noticed the shift immediately. Whatever softness existed in Damien moments ago disappeared behind the familiar mask powerful men wore when business entered the room. The man lowered his voice carefully. It is the board. They moved the meeting up to tomorrow morning. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. Of course they did. The man glanced briefly toward Evelyn standing beside the table before speaking again in an even lower voice. And there is another issue. Damien looked up slowly. What issue? The man hesitated. Someone leaked information about the merger. The warmth vanished completely from Damien's eyes after that. The warmth around Damien Whitmore disappeared so quickly it felt like the temperature inside the restaurant dropped with it. 1 second he had been sitting beneath the amber lights, trading quiet observations with Evelyn over black coffee and rain against the windows. The next, his entire expression hardened into something distant and controlled. Business. Power. Pressure. Evelyn stepped back instinctively as the man with the briefcase leaned closer toward Damien's table. How bad? Damien asked quietly. Worse than we thought, the man replied. The stock moved almost 4% after hours. Somebody leaked details before the announcement. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. He glanced toward the restaurant windows where rain streaked down the glass in silver lines. Who knows? Only the board, legal, and 3 people from acquisitions. Evelyn picked up the empty coffee pot slowly, trying not to listen while still hearing every word. That happened often in restaurants. People forgot servers existed. They spoke freely around them because uniforms made workers invisible. Damien noticed her stepping away. Evelyn. She paused. Yes. Thank you for the coffee. Simple words. But his tone softened slightly again while speaking to her. The man with the briefcase looked surprised by that. Most executives never thanked staff members twice. Evelyn gave a small nod. You are welcome. Then she returned quietly toward the service station while Damien stood from the table at last. He buttoned his charcoal jacket carefully, movements precise and controlled despite the tension now surrounding him. Get the car ready, he told the man beside him. And tell legal nobody speaks to the press until I say so. Understood. Damien reached for the check folder on the table, but the manager appeared instantly. Mr. Whitmore, dinner is on the house this evening. Damien looked at him evenly. Why? The manager blinked nervously. As appreciation for your loyalty to the restaurant. Damien closed the folder again without opening it. No, sir, please. If you want to improve this restaurant, Damien said calmly, start by treating your employees like human beings before wealthy customers force you to. The manager lowered his eyes immediately. Damien placed a black credit card inside the folder anyway before turning toward the exit. But halfway across the dining room, he stopped unexpectedly. Evelyn stood near the service counter organizing receipts beneath a small brass lamp. Her head remained lowered while she worked carefully through the stack. Damien watched her quietly for a second longer than necessary. Evelyn. She looked up. Yes. Would you walk me to the door? The request surprised both of them. Usually wealthy customers left restaurants surrounded by assistants and noise. Not conversations. Evelyn hesitated briefly before nodding once. Together they crossed the dining room beneath the soft jazz music and golden chandelier light, while conversations lowered around them again. Some customers openly stared now. Others pretended not to. Damien ignored all of it. "You should not have defended me like that," Evelyn said quietly as they neared the entrance. Rain hammered harder against the glass outside now, turning the city into a blur of silver and gold reflections. Damien slipped one hand into his coat pocket. Why not? Because powerful people usually regret embarrassing other powerful people. She embarrassed herself. Evelyn glanced toward him. Still, Damien stopped near the front doors. "You think I care what people like her think about me?" Evelyn studied his face carefully. "I think people with your level of influence are usually very careful." A faint smile touched Damien's expression again. "And you think I am not?" "I think," Evelyn answered softly, "you are tired." The sentence landed harder than she expected. Damien looked at her fully then. For a brief moment, the billionaire mask slipped again beneath the warm entrance lights. Exhaustion lived there. Pressure too. "You notice too much," he said quietly. "Occupational hazard. Waitressing. Watching people." Outside, headlights swept across the rain-soaked street as a black sedan pulled smoothly toward the curb. Damien glanced at it briefly before looking back at Evelyn. "You asked earlier why I noticed people like you." Evelyn remained silent. Damien's voice lowered slightly. "Because when I was younger, nobody noticed my mother either." The storm outside seemed louder suddenly. "She worked in a diner outside Philadelphia for almost 2 decades, he continued. Most customers never learned her name. Evelyn listened quietly while the hostess behind them pretended very hard not to eavesdrop. One night, Damien said softly, a man humiliated her in front of an entire restaurant because his coffee was cold. His gray eyes drifted toward the rain. Nobody defended her. Evelyn felt something tighten painfully in her chest. Damien gave a faint shrug afterward, almost dismissing his own memory. "I was 14. What happened?" she asked gently. She smiled anyway. His expression darkened slightly. "Then she cried in the parking lot where nobody could see her." Silence settled between them after that. Not awkward. Heavy. Honest. The sedan driver stepped out with an umbrella, but Damien barely acknowledged him. Evelyn looked down briefly at the polished marble floor beneath them. People can be cruel when they think someone cannot fight back. "Yes," Damien said quietly. "And sometimes the cruelest people are not the loud ones." Evelyn understood immediately what he meant. The silent ones. The watchers. The people who did nothing. Damien glanced toward her stained cuff, barely visible beneath the fresh apron now. "You never answered my question earlier." "Which question?" "Why this restaurant?" Evelyn looked toward the city lights outside instead of answering immediately. "Because some jobs pay bills," she said softly. "And some jobs remind you not to become bitter." Damien studied her carefully. "That sounds like experience talking." "It usually is." The driver approached with the umbrella then. "Sir, we should leave. Midtown traffic is getting worse because of the storm." Damien nodded once before turning back toward Evelyn. "Good night." "Good night, Mr. Whitmore." He paused slightly. "Damien." Evelyn blinked once, surprised by the correction. Billionaires rarely invited waitresses to use their first names. "Good night," she repeated softly. "Damien." For the first time all evening, something genuine warmed his expression completely. Small, brief, real. Then he stepped outside beneath the umbrella into the cold Manhattan rain while headlights reflected across wet pavement around him. Evelyn watched through the glass as the black sedan disappeared slowly into traffic. She should have returned to work immediately afterward. Instead, she stood there quietly for several seconds longer than she meant to. Because somehow, without fully understanding why, the restaurant suddenly felt emptier after he left. By midnight, Whitmore House Steak and Lounge had finally emptied into the rain. The chandeliers still glowed softly above polished tables, but the noise of expensive conversations and clinking glasses was gone now, replaced by the quiet rhythm of cleanup. Chairs scraped gently across hardwood floors while kitchen staff wrapped leftovers and counted inventory beneath dimmed lights. Evelyn stood near the espresso machine balancing receipts against the register totals, her fingers moving carefully through stacks of paper while exhaustion settled deeper into her shoulders. It had been a long night, longer emotionally than physically. "You missed a zero." Evelyn looked up immediately. Chef Laurent stood beside her holding 2 ceramic mugs of tea. "You are distracted tonight," he said softly. She corrected the number with a tired smile. "Apparently." He handed her one of the mugs. Chamomile. No sugar. Exactly how she always drank it after difficult shifts. "Thank you." Laurent leaned against the counter beside her, while kitchen workers laughed quietly in Spanish near the back hallway. "That man likes you." Evelyn nearly choked on the tea. "Chef, I am old, not blind." She shook her head immediately. "He does not even know me." Sometimes people recognize character before history. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the steaming tea again. That sentence stayed with her longer than she expected. Around 12:30, the staff finally began leaving one by one beneath umbrellas and heavy coats. Melanie waved goodbye while rushing toward the subway before the storm became worse. The bartender disappeared next, followed by the dishwasher carrying leftover bread in a paper bag for his children at home. Ordinary people. Quiet people. The kind wealthy customers barely noticed during dinner service. Evelyn stayed behind another 20 minutes helping the night manager reorganize invoices after the chaos earlier. She never complained about staying late. Extra hours mattered. Every dollar mattered. Especially now. "You should go home," the manager said awkwardly while avoiding direct eye contact. Guilt still lingered visibly in him after what happened earlier. Evelyn finished stacking the receipts neatly. "Almost done." He hesitated before speaking again. "About tonight, it is all right." "No," he exhaled slowly. "It was not." Evelyn paused then. The honesty surprised her more than the apology itself. The manager rubbed the back of his neck uncomfortably. "I should have stepped in sooner." She studied him for a second before giving a small nod. "Maybe next time you will." The words were not cruel. Somehow that made them heavier. Outside, rain continued falling steadily over Manhattan, as Evelyn finally stepped onto the sidewalk beneath a dark navy umbrella shortly after 1 in the morning. Cold wind curled between skyscrapers while taxi tires hissed across wet pavement nearby. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and started walking toward Lexington Avenue instead of immediately heading underground to the subway. Sometimes after difficult nights, she needed air before going home. The city felt different after midnight. Quieter. More honest somehow. Fewer performances. Fewer masks. Neon signs reflected across puddles, while distant sirens echoed softly somewhere downtown. Evelyn walked past closed flower shops, late-night diners, and glowing apartment windows where strangers lived entire lives she would never know. Her phone buzzed inside her coat pocket. She almost ignored it until she saw the name on the screen. Claire. Her older sister. Evelyn answered immediately. "Hey, did I wake you?" Claire asked softly. "No, just leaving work." A pause followed. "Long night." Evelyn glanced up at the rain falling through the yellow streetlights. Something like that. Claire knew her well enough not to push immediately. "Mom had a good day today." Evelyn's expression softened instantly. "Really?" She remembered the garden again. Evelyn stopped walking for a moment beneath the awning of a closed bookstore. "That is good." She asked about you. The familiar ache returned quietly beneath Evelyn's ribs. "What did you tell her?" "That you are working too hard and pretending you are fine." Evelyn laughed softly under her breath. Sounds accurate. Her mother had been living in an assisted care facility in Connecticut for nearly 2 years now. Early onset dementia. Some days she remembered birthdays and recipes. Other days she forgot entire decades. Evelyn sent nearly every extra dollar she earned toward treatment costs. That was why she worked double shifts. Why she stopped graduate school. Why expensive restaurants mattered more than dreams now. "You should visit this weekend," Claire said gently. "If you can." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "I will try." Another silence settled between them before Claire spoke again. "You sound tired." "I am." "Anything happened tonight?" Evelyn almost answered automatically with nothing. Instead, she looked out toward the rain-soaked avenue where headlights blurred silver across the wet streets. "A billionaire defended me in front of an entire restaurant." Silence. Then Claire laughed softly. "You are kidding." "I wish I was." "What kind of billionaire?" Evelyn thought about Damien standing beneath the chandelier light earlier. Calm voice. Controlled anger. The strange sadness hidden behind his eyes. "The complicated kind," she said quietly. After ending the call a few minutes later, Evelyn continued walking downtown beneath the rain until she reached the subway entrance near 53rd Street. But just before descending the stairs, something caught her attention across the avenue. A black sedan sat parked beneath a glowing street lamp. Familiar. The same polished car that picked Damien up earlier. Evelyn slowed slightly. The driver stood outside smoking beneath an umbrella while talking on the phone. He noticed her almost immediately and straightened. "Miss Carter?" Evelyn stopped completely, surprised. "Yes." The driver approached politely through the rain. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to give you this if I saw you leave tonight." He handed her a small cream-colored envelope. No logo. No signature. Just her name written neatly across the front in dark ink. Evelyn stared at it carefully while rain tapped softly against her umbrella. "What is it?" The driver smiled faintly. "I do not know, but he told me to make sure you got home safely afterward." Before Evelyn could respond, the driver returned quietly to the sedan. Seconds later, the car disappeared into rainy Manhattan traffic, leaving her standing alone beneath the subway lights holding an envelope from a billionaire she barely understood. Evelyn stood beneath the subway entrance light for several long seconds after the black sedan disappeared into traffic. Rain tapped steadily against her umbrella while yellow reflections shimmered across the wet Manhattan streets around her. The cream-colored envelope felt strangely heavy in her hand despite weighing almost nothing. Wealthy people usually sent flowers, or money, or business cards with hidden expectations attached. Something about this felt different. Careful. Personal. She finally stepped down into the subway station, the sound of the storm fading behind her as warm underground air wrapped around exhausted commuters waiting beneath flickering fluorescent lights. A saxophone player performed near the turnstiles while strangers hurried past without looking at one another. New York after midnight. Everyone carrying invisible stories. Evelyn found an empty seat inside the nearly quiet downtown train and looked at the envelope again while the subway rattled forward through dark tunnels. Her name was written neatly in black ink. Not rushed. Not printed by an assistant. Handwritten. That unsettled her more than it should have. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a single folded piece of thick stationery. Nothing else. No check. No business proposal. No hidden invitation to something expensive and uncomfortable. Just a short handwritten note. "Thank you for reminding me that dignity still exists in this city. Also, your manager forgot to include your tip. Damien." Evelyn stared at the note quietly. Then she noticed something tucked behind the paper. A restaurant receipt. Folded once. She opened it carefully and nearly stopped breathing for a second. $15,000. Her eyes widened immediately. Around her, subway passengers continued scrolling through phones and staring blankly into exhaustion while the train roared beneath Manhattan. Nobody noticed the waitress sitting silently with trembling fingers holding more money than she usually earned in several months. Evelyn looked back at the note again. There was no arrogance in it. No sentence about changing her life. No mention of charity. Just dignity. And somehow that made the gesture feel even larger. She folded the receipt carefully and closed her eyes briefly against the rattling train windows. $15,000 could cover 3 months at the care facility. Maybe 4 if she skipped sleep again and picked up more shifts. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Not because of the money itself. Because somebody had seen her struggle without forcing her to explain it. The next morning, rain still covered Manhattan in a gray haze when Damien Whitmore stepped into the 42nd floor boardroom of Whitmore Capital. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city while executives in expensive suits sat around a polished walnut table, studying financial reports with exhausted expressions. Coffee steamed beside tablets and legal documents. Damien walked in exactly on time. Calm. Controlled. Impossible to read. "Good morning," someone muttered nervously. Damien ignored the greeting and tossed a thin folder onto the table instead. "Who leaked the merger details?" Silence followed immediately. The board members exchanged uneasy glances while Damien removed his coat slowly. "I am not asking twice." Richard Holloway, head of acquisitions, adjusted his tie. "We still do not know if the leak came internally." Damien looked directly at him. "It did." "Damien, the press quoted language copied directly from our confidential summary." His voice remained quiet. "That document existed in exactly 4 offices. Nobody spoke after that." Damien slowly loosened the cufflinks on his sleeves before continuing. "You know what interests me most about betrayal?" Richard swallowed visibly. "It usually comes from people who believe power protects them from consequences. Across the table, attorneys shifted uncomfortably while storm clouds rolled beyond the massive windows behind them. Damien's phone vibrated once against the table. He glanced down automatically. An unknown number. Normally, he ignored unknown numbers instantly. This time he answered. Whitmore. A soft pause. Then Evelyn's voice. I think your accountant made a mistake. Damien leaned back slowly in his chair while every executive at the table pretended not to notice the subtle shift in his expression. Did he? $15,000 is not a tip. A faint smile appeared despite the tension surrounding him. Depends on the service. Across the subway line downtown, Evelyn stood outside a small neighborhood coffee shop near her apartment building holding her phone beneath a dripping awning. I cannot accept this. Why not? Because it is too much. Damien glanced around the boardroom, full of men terrified about billion-dollar losses. Strange how none of it felt as exhausting as this conversation suddenly did. Evelyn. Yes. Did you earn it? She frowned softly. That is not the point. Actually, Damien replied quietly. It is exactly the point. Silence lingered between them for a second. Behind Evelyn, taxis splashed through puddles while pedestrians rushed past carrying umbrellas and paper coffee cups. People do not leave $15,000 tips, she said carefully. People like me usually do not sit quietly while someone gets humiliated either. Another pause. Damien lowered his voice slightly. You made me remember who I used to be last night. The honesty in the sentence caught Evelyn off guard completely. In the boardroom, several executives exchanged confused glances while watching their billionaire CEO stare thoughtfully at rain beyond the windows during a phone call that clearly had nothing to do with mergers or stock prices. I still cannot keep all of it, Evelyn said softly. Then donate part of it. That is not helping. Damien's expression warmed faintly. No, but arguing with you is unexpectedly entertaining. For the first time since opening the envelope, Evelyn laughed quietly. Real laughter. Soft and surprised beneath the gray Manhattan morning. Damien closed his eyes briefly after hearing it, because somehow that sound felt more honest than anything spoken inside his boardroom all week. What are you doing today? He asked before thinking. Evelyn blinked. Working. Of course you are. Some of us cannot skip meetings and lose millions gracefully. Several executives looked personally attacked by that sentence without even hearing it. Damien almost smiled again. Fair point. Richard cleared his throat loudly from across the boardroom table, clearly frustrated now. Damien ignored him completely. Evelyn. Yes. Keep the money. She hesitated. Why? Damien looked slowly around the room full of expensive suits and nervous ambition before answering quietly. Because not everything valuable should have to suffer first. The board meeting ended 3 hours later with 3 executives under internal investigation and Damien Whitmore more exhausted than he cared to admit. Rain still covered Manhattan in a cold gray mist outside the 42nd floor windows, while assistants hurried through the halls carrying legal documents and untouched coffee cups. Damien stood alone in his office after everyone left, loosening his tie slowly while staring at the skyline beyond the glass. Usually moments like this satisfied him. Control restored. Problems contained. Market stabilized. Instead, his thoughts kept drifting somewhere far simpler. A subway station. A quiet laugh over the phone. A waitress who spoke about dignity like it still mattered. His assistant knocked gently before entering. Sir, your 2 o'clock canceled. Damien barely looked away from the windows. Good. Would you like me to reschedule the investor lunch? No, the assistant hesitated carefully. You also received another invitation from Senator Collins for Saturday evening. Damien finally turned. Decline it. Again. Especially again. The assistant nodded immediately and disappeared without another question. Damien rubbed one hand across his face slowly after the door closed. For years his life had been schedules, negotiations, and carefully calculated appearances. Every dinner strategic. Every conversation measured. Somewhere along the way he stopped recognizing peace when it appeared in front of him. His phone buzzed softly against the desk. A text message from an unknown number. Thank you. I kept the money. Damien stared at the message longer than necessary before replying. Good. Another pause. Then her answer appeared almost immediately. My mother will finally get her treatment extended. Something tightened quietly in his chest after reading that. He sat down slowly behind the massive walnut desk while rain blurred the city outside. What treatment? He regretted asking the moment he sent it. Too personal. Too direct. Several minutes passed with no response. Damien almost put the phone away when it vibrated again. Memory care facility in Connecticut. Early dementia. The office suddenly felt too quiet after that. Damien leaned back slowly in his chair, remembering his own mother forgetting names near the end of her life. Not dementia, cancer medication, but memory still faded eventually. One painful piece at a time. I am sorry, he typed carefully. Another pause. Then, she still remembers music. Some days that is enough. Damien closed his eyes briefly. Strange how one sentence from her carried more humanity than entire conversations inside boardrooms. Downtown, Evelyn stood inside a crowded pharmacy waiting for a prescription refill while watching rain slide down the front windows. She had not planned to text Damien again after thanking him, but somehow silence felt ruder than honesty. Her phone buzzed once more. Do you work tonight? Evelyn stared at the message with visible confusion. Billionaires did not text waitresses casually in the middle of the afternoon. Usually they forgot workers existed the second a meal ended. Yes, she replied carefully. Double shift. 3 dots appeared immediately. That should be illegal. Despite herself, Evelyn smiled faintly while standing between cold medicine shelves and magazines no one really read anymore. New York moved around her in tired noise and fluorescent light. Ordinary life. Somehow his messages felt strangely separate from all of it. Most people complain about work. Some people depend on it, she wrote back. Damien looked at the sentence for a long moment. Then he stood abruptly, grabbed his coat, and left the office without warning anyone. By 6:30 that evening, Whitmore House Steak and Lounge glowed warmly against the rainy Manhattan streets while expensive cars lined the curb outside once again. Inside, crystal glasses shimmered beneath chandeliers while soft jazz drifted across the dining room. Evelyn adjusted her apron near the service station before beginning another shift. She looked tired today, more than usual, but lighter somehow too. Melanie noticed immediately. Okay, she whispered dramatically while organizing menus. What happened with the billionaire? Evelyn nearly dropped the silverware roll she was holding. Nothing happened. You are smiling at your phone now. I smiled one time. That counts. Evelyn shook her head while trying unsuccessfully not to laugh. He helped my mother. Melanie froze immediately. Wait. Seriously? Evelyn nodded once. Then I officially love him. Do not say that so loudly. Why? Melanie grinned wickedly. You think billionaires cannot hear? Before Evelyn could answer, the front entrance opened and conversation throughout the restaurant shifted subtly all over again. Damien Whitmore walked inside wearing a dark navy overcoat still dusted with rain. No assistants tonight. No briefcase. No tense executive beside him whispering about mergers. Just Damien. The hostess blinked in surprise. Good evening, Mr. Whitmore. Good evening. His eyes moved through the dining room almost immediately until they found Evelyn beside the service station. Something warmer entered his expression the second he saw her. Not dramatic. Quiet. Real. Evelyn felt it instantly. Dangerous thing, being looked at like that by someone who actually noticed you. Damien approached slowly while customers around the restaurant pretended not to stare. You came back, Evelyn said softly when he reached her. Apparently, I like the coffee here. The coffee is terrible. A faint smile appeared. Then maybe I came back for the waitress. Heat rose immediately into Evelyn's face before she could stop it. Damien noticed. Of course he noticed. You should not flirt with employees, she said carefully while trying to recover her composure. I am not flirting. His voice lowered slightly. I am being honest. The sentence settled heavily between them beneath the warm chandelier lights, while rain tapped softly against the windows outside. Nearby, Melanie almost walked directly into a wall while pretending not to watch. For a moment, neither of them moved. The restaurant continued around them in soft jazz, candlelight, and quiet conversations, but the space between Damien Whitmore and Evelyn Carter suddenly felt separate from all of it. Warmer somehow, more honest. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly, trying to steady herself while holding the tray against her chest. You should probably sit down before people start inventing stories, she said softly. Damien glanced around the dining room, where at least 3 customers were already pretending not to stare. Too late. That earned another quiet laugh from her before she caught herself again. Dangerous. She needed to remember dangerous. Men like Damien belonged to worlds built from private elevators, political dinners, and financial headlines. Men like him did not stay in the lives of women who worked double shifts and counted subway fares carefully at the end of the month. But then again, men like him usually did not defend waitresses publicly either. "Your usual table?" she asked professionally. Damien studied her for a second longer before nodding once. "Please." Evelyn led him toward table 12 beneath the warm chandelier glow, while whispers drifted quietly behind them. Near the bar, Melanie mouthed unbelievable dramatically toward another waitress, who nearly laughed out loud while polishing wine glasses. Damien pulled out the chair slightly before sitting, movements calm and effortless as always. "You know," Evelyn said while setting down a menu, "most billionaires demand attention when they walk into a room." "That sounds exhausting. I think they enjoy it." Damien loosened the cuff of his watch slightly. "Then they probably spend too much time around people who are impressed by money." Evelyn tilted her head carefully. "And you do not." His eyes lifted toward her slowly. "Not anymore." The honesty in the answer settled quietly between them. Before Evelyn could respond, her manager suddenly appeared beside the table looking more nervous than ever. "Mr. Whitmore, welcome back." Damien nodded politely. "Thank you." The manager cleared his throat awkwardly. "I also wanted to personally apologize again for the other night." Evelyn looked surprised. Damien remained calm. "You already did." "Still." The manager glanced briefly toward Evelyn before continuing. "Some situations remind us what kind of people we are becoming." Damien looked at him carefully for a second. Then he gave a small nod. "Fair enough." The manager exhaled with visible relief before walking away. Evelyn watched him disappear toward the kitchen. "You changed something," she said quietly. No, Damien picked up the water glass thoughtfully. He changed something himself. Across the restaurant, rain continued sliding down the tall windows while headlights reflected silver against the wet Manhattan streets outside. The storm had softened now. Not gone, just quieter. Like the city itself was finally breathing again. "How is your mother?" Damien asked after a moment. Evelyn blinked, surprised he remembered immediately. "Better today." "Good. She used to play piano." Damien leaned back slightly, listening. "Professionally?" "No." Evelyn smiled faintly at the memory. "But she played every Sunday morning while we cleaned the apartment." Her expression softened further. Even when money was tight, she made ordinary things feel beautiful. Damien looked down briefly at the tablecloth beneath his hands. "My mother used to sing while folding laundry." Evelyn smiled gently. "Badly?" "Terribly." That made her laugh again. Real laughter this time. Quiet enough not to disturb nearby tables, but bright enough to change the entire atmosphere around them. Damien watched her carefully while she laughed. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Because she laughed like someone who forgot how tired she was for a few seconds. And somehow, he realized he wanted to keep hearing that sound. A waiter approached with Damien's bourbon, but Damien surprised him immediately. "Actually, coffee tonight." The waiter looked confused. "Sir." "Black." Evelyn raised one eyebrow after the waiter left. "You are choosing coffee over 12-year bourbon now. Apparently your terrible coffee is growing on me." That might be the saddest sentence ever spoken in this restaurant. Damien smiled faintly again. Then his phone buzzed sharply against the table. The expression on his face changed the second he read the screen. "Colder now." "Controlled." Evelyn noticed immediately. "Bad news." Damien stared at the message for another second before locking the screen. "Just business." "The merger?" He looked up sharply. "How did you know about that?" Evelyn shrugged lightly. "People with your expression are either getting divorced or handling acquisitions." Damien almost laughed under his breath. "Remind me never to underestimate waitresses again." But the tension remained in his eyes. Evelyn noticed that too. "What happened?" Damien hesitated. He was not used to discussing business outside boardrooms. Especially not with someone who owed him nothing. Maybe that was exactly why he answered honestly. "Someone close to me leaked confidential information." "Someone you trusted." It was not a question. Damien nodded once slowly. Evelyn looked toward the rain outside. Betrayal usually hurts more when powerful people experience it. Damien studied her carefully. "Why?" "Because powerful people are used to controlling outcomes." Her voice remained soft. "Trust is one of the few things they cannot force." Silence settled between them again. Not uncomfortable. Thoughtful. Damien looked at her differently after that. Most people around him spoke carefully. Strategically. Evelyn simply spoke truth quietly and let it exist. You missed your calling, he said finally. Evelyn frowned slightly, meaning, you understand people too well to spend your life carrying trays. The sentence hit harder than he intended. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly toward the polished silverware beside the table. Sometimes life changes directions before people are ready. Damien noticed the sadness hidden carefully beneath the words. Before he could ask more, the restaurant piano player suddenly transitioned into an old jazz standard near the lounge. Soft, slow, familiar. Evelyn froze for half a second after hearing it. Damien noticed immediately. What? Her expression shifted almost invisibly. Nothing. Evelyn. She looked toward the piano quietly. My mother used to play this song every Sunday morning. Damien watched her carefully then. The warm restaurant lights reflected softly in her eyes while rain whispered against the windows outside. And in that moment, surrounded by Manhattan wealth and polished elegance, Damien Whitmore suddenly understood something important. The strongest people he had ever met were never the loudest ones in the room. They were the quiet ones who kept choosing kindness after life gave them every reason not to.